So today we're going to be talking about Python list comprehension. If you've never heard of Python or list comprehension, that's okay, because in this video, I'm going to be assuming that the audience has knowledge of neither of those. So if you're one of those people, no worries, that's okay, we're going to get into it. Python is a programming language, and lists are what they sound like. They're basically a collection of data, and in Python, lists are sequential, so that means order is preserved. So you make a list, whatever order you put it in, it's going to stay that way until you change it. Which brings me to the third point here. Lists are mutable, which means you can make it and you can change elements or, in general, the order of the list. And if you're confused, if you've seen C or Java, arrays in C or Java are basically the same as Python lists. So for some of the basics, I know this is boring for those of you who are more experienced, but the basics are declaring a list, storing a list in a variable, and indexing the list. So let's jump right into that. Declaring a list is pretty simple, and storing it in a variable is simple. Say we want an empty list, we use the bracket notation. So we want an empty list here, and print it out. And here we see an empty list. So let's start putting some things in there. 1, 2, 3. And it is printed in the exact same order, 1, 2, 3. So let's say, for example, we want the first element. We use indexing, and it's also bracket notation, and it's 0 index, meaning we start counting from 0. The first element is x sub 0. So first element here, let's go ahead and print that out. Okay, first element, there we go. Pretty simple. A little more advanced, constructing a list, we can use loops to iterate. Let's go ahead and demonstrate that. Back to it. While loop, start with a variable. Say we want a list from 0 to 9. Start with an empty list, and then we just iterate from 0 to 9 and append to the list. And then we need to increment I, otherwise we're gonna end up in an infinite loop. So at the end, let's just print x, list from 0 to 9. We can do the same exact thing with a for loop. Just take away the I variable, the top. And then we use range, which basically just gives us a range from 0 to 10, non-inclusive though, so it's going to go up to 9. And we just append again. 0 to 9, there we go. And once we have x, we can also do a for loop without the range. So let's go ahead and loop through the elements of x using no range this time. We're just going to go straight through the elements and append them to y. Let's go double the element in x just to see, so we can see the difference. And then put it out. So it's basically the same exact thing, just take away the range, and then that brings us to the more interesting point, which is list comprehension, the title of the video. This is the bare syntax for list comprehension. It might be confusing if you're not really familiar with this sort of thing. So I thought we'd just dive into an example. So right here, pretty basic for loop, just going list from 0 to 9, as we just saw, print it out. To tell you I'm not lying, but we can basically do the same exact thing with list comprehension, just much more concise. It might be confusing. Sorry. So right here, a lot of people can understand this. It's pretty simple. Basically, just want to reorder things so that it all fits on one line. So want to squeeze that for loop on here. Get rid of that. And then we'll print X. And it's basically the same thing. We do have the optional conditional here at the end. So let's say we want to filter even or odd. Let's say even, because I'm feeling evens right now. And if this condition evaluates to true, then we're going to go ahead and include it in our list. If it's false, we're going to exclude it. So hypothetically, when we run this and we print X, we should only see even values of I being added to the list X. And that's exactly what we see. If you don't know what modulus is, this is basically just saying that I is an even number. And if we want to see the odds, we change it to this. And now we see the odds. So that's really the basics of it. The advantages, again, if you're not really familiar with this sort of thing, it might not make much sense. But I'd say the biggest advantage is performance. And the reason we get a performance boost is because, let's go back to the basic for loop. So we have our empty list, and then here and I. The difference between these two things, for Y, we have our space allocated, and then we're expanding as we go. Whereas with list comprehension, we allocate the space we need before we run, and then there's less resizing, so it runs faster, and that's why we get the performance boost. It's also more Pythonic, so it's more concise, it's shorter, it's cleaner, and it just fits the style guidelines more closely. Is it worth it? Personally, I like it. It makes me feel like I'm writing good code, even if it's exactly the same. So I'm gonna say it's worth it, but to each their own. So yeah.